What's the saddest thing you've ever seen in public? Many years ago, while at college, I was sitting in my dorm room when I heard a loud bang. I ran out to the street to find that a young man who was crossing the street at night had been hit by a drunk woman. It was a well-lit area, but she was plastered. He looked up at me and then passed out. He had a head wound that was bleeding profusely. There was nothing I could do, and soon a nurse was at the scene. A friend went to visit him in the hospital, but he was in a coma. He died 4 days later. I found out he was the only child in a family in Iran. He was studying at the university to become a doctor. Since that time, I often notice people who carelessly step out into the street, assuming that the car that is coming will slow down and not hit them. Especially now with cell phones, people don't pay attention as much as they should. I can't imagine having only one child, raising that child, and then losing that child in such a tragic way. Second story. Well, I have been in lots of different jails and prisons in the last 35 years, and I have seen a lot of horrific and sickening things. I'll assure you, prison is not for the faint of heart. I guess that the saddest thing is seeing a man beg for his insulin medication for about a week. After many requests from him, I stepped in as the pod pastor to try to get the guards to understand that a man is going to die if he doesn't get his insulin. True to my words, the next morning, as we came out of the cells, the man dropped and fell unconscious. I immediately tried CPR against the guards' commands to stop. I was kicked and beaten. He was taken away dead. I'll assure you that this was not the worst thing I've seen on the inside. It was even more tragic because this man had been denied medication and was only charged with a misdemeanor. He was young and had a full life ahead of him. The evil behind the badge must stop. Third story. I was in the dressing room at Nordstrom's, and I heard an obviously wealthy woman berate the poor salesperson. She entered the dressing room next to me. She started to talk on her phone to someone. You would just not believe what shabby, incompetent people they hire here. They are just the worst. A bunch of dolts. No class at all. So base. So common. Well, I guess there is only so much that minimum wage gets you. I felt horrible for the poor saleswoman. I know she could hear this snotty woman. When I left the dressing room, I saw the woman standing with her back to me and the saleswoman. Winking at the tearful saleswoman, I tapped the rude woman on the shoulder. Excuse me, do you work here? Fourth story. My parents married in college. My mother was a nurse, and my father joined the Air Force to become a pilot. After serving in the Air Force, he became a commercial airline pilot, and eventually a captain. 4 children, a home they built in a beautiful town, my mother being able to work around my dad's schedule. Traveling. Life was good. Until my father came home from a trip and told my mother he wanted a divorce. He had been having an affair, was in love, and wanted out. 2 weeks later, he got sick, something very unusual for him. It was eventually diagnosed as malaria that he had picked up on a flight to Africa. He spent about a week in the hospital in our small town in NG, with specialists coming out from Illinois. Malaria is not very common in New Jersey. Within a week, he was back in the hospital with an acquired staph infection. The doctors debated about antibiotics as he had developed an allergy to penicillin. They hung the new antibiotic on his IV, and he promptly stopped breathing. By the time a tracheostomy was done, he had suffered irreparable brain damage. He was never able to work again. He could take care of himself physically, suffering mostly short-term memory loss, with slight physical uncoordination and speech impairment. He was 47 years old. He lived to be 86, dying in 2013. My mother spent 40 years being the responsible caretaker and legal guardian for the man who had wanted to leave her. Fifth story. I was sitting at Walmart one day waiting for my ride to pick me up. I watched a beautiful girl of about 16 walk wearing a really pretty dress that was black down the sides and white in the center, accompanied by her mom. I guessed that they may have been after nylons or something, since she was wearing a formal, and it was prom night, and this was Walmart. I was still waiting when they came back out, and since I was bored, I was watching them when they passed into the bright sunlight. I was shocked to see that in the sunlight, the center white panels of her dress disappeared. I got up and followed them out to their car, trying my best to block others' views of her scantily clad backside. As I reached the car, I walked up to the driver's window, which was already opened, and said, "Pardon me. Normally, I don't bother strangers, but do you know that when your beautiful daughter walked into the bright sun, her dress became invisible in the white areas?" The woman looked concerned, but the daughter looked at me and said, "It does not." I just smiled at her and said, "Then how do you suppose I would know you are wearing burgundy-colored G-string pants?" The girl's face went white, and her mother took her back into the store with a car blanket around her to get her a shawl or wrap to wear over it. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.